as we wrap up this exploration of fear, I want to focus on trauma. The greatest fear that we can have as human beings connects directly to the greatest pain that we are afraid of experiencing. And the greatest pain that we're afraid of experiencing is a traumatic pain. And trauma is not just a feeling. It is a sensation. It is a belief. It is an overwhelming flooding of the psyche and the senses as a large mass of energy moves slowly towards us and gradually obliterates all perspective until all we see is the overwhelming face of trauma. And in that moment of flooded awareness, we lose all track of perspective, all track of time, all track of space. And we feel obliterated. Our identity becomes that of the trauma because there's nothing else in view. This is a traumatic experience. It's biological, it's psychological, it's emotional, it's mental, it's all-consuming. Now, every single one of us has had a traumatic experience. And in most cases in our cult, due to trauma illiteracy, psychological illiteracy, emotional illiteracy, and chauvinism, the de-emphasis and deprioritization of inner states in favor of the outer material states that represent the yang or masculine face of reality. Every one of us has had a traumatic experience, and most of us experienced that overwhelming sensation and terror being handled with incredible cruelty due to ignorance and incompetence. And as a result of feeling overwhelmed with horrific feelings and experiencing and grasping, either instinctively or consciously, that no one around us knows how to make this better. This person is making it worse over here. This person doesn't get it. This person is a complete moron when it comes to this traumatic experience. And I don't know what I'm doing. The natural reaction of the ego in that amount of pain and helplessness commits to something that cannot be attained. And the commitment goes something like this: I'm going to do everything in my power to never have this experience again. Now, this is an unattainable goal. And precisely because its solution is faulty, we already feel anxious because we grasp at some level that if we couldn't stop the first trauma, and if the people in our life couldn't respond effectively to the first trauma, and if we never consciously went out and sought the trauma, no one goes out and says, I think I'm going to have a majorly traumatic event of profound helplessness and misery, and I'm going to surround myself with people who don't know what they're doing in that terrain and who are going to make it worse so that I'll have the worst experience of my entire life. Now, in order to go about that, I'm going to do this, 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 and this, and then I'll wait for this to happen, and there we'll have our trauma. Now, if you did do that consciously and you knew what you're doing, first of all, you'd need a little bit of trauma awareness to set yourself up for a trauma. And if you did go about it that consciously, then you could reasonably decide, I'm never going to do that again. I'm not going to do this, 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 and this, and this. And then I'll be around different people and I won't do it again. But from a place of deep ignorance, to simply announce that something we have no idea how we did it the first time, we're never going to do it again, is absurd. And we know it. And as a result, what we instead create is a fear of ourselves, a fear of other people, and a fear of the unknown. Because something came out of the unknown, and we had something to do with it, and other people had something to do with it, so they're all scary. And so I'm going to try and avoid the unknown. I'm going to keep my distance from other people, and I'm not going to fully trust my own instincts. And that's how I'm never going to have a traumatic event again. Well, you've now created massive amounts of anxiety because some part of you is trustworthy and some part isn't, but you can't tell the difference. And some part of other people is trustworthy and some part isn't, and you can't tell the difference. And 99.9% of all reality is unknown. And so now you've made an enemy. You're now afraid of most of all of reality that's out there. And this is the anxious continuum that many of us, as we try and grow but not touch the unknown, as we try and have good relationships but not get too close to people, as we try and get in touch with ourselves but not follow that thing that we're so afraid of in ourselves, we've now divided and split the self in a tug of war in which no one can win. Once you've divided yourself between you and the world, you're now at war with the world. No one can win that. You can't win a war with the world. Hitler gave it a shot. It doesn't work. You can't go to war with the world. You can't go to war with yourself and win, because whatever part of you wins, there's another part of you that loses. And you don't get to have a whole integrated self, which is the safest and most competent self you can have, when one part has dominated the other part through fear and bullying and manipulation or whatever. It just doesn't work long term. So the answer is to become trauma literate. So I want to outline a few things that can be springboards. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk is a terrific overview of thousands of years of trauma in multiple histories and shed some light on the willful ignorance of our own culture as we passionately try to deny that it's even an issue, even as it defines so much of our cult. Another book or kind of avenue of exploration is For Your Own Good and The Body Never Lies by Alice Miller. Then there's Gabor Mate and his work on addiction. He has another one with a body title, I forget the name, but if you look at Gabor Mate's work around trauma and addiction, you again get a widening view. There are also several other authors whose names escape me at the moment. And I've broken those books down on a site that I made to kind of track my own journey through PTSD and trauma called understandtrauma.com. And if you look and spend some time, and I want to begin by cutting through the cult chauvinism that says your inner world is valueless. And so, of course, if you believe that, because you've adopted the chauvinism, then you'll study typing for 60 hours, you'll learn to drive for 40 hours, you'll learn Microsoft Word or whatever. You'll spend 180 hours studying, this program and that, and you'll never spend a single competent hour studying your own psyche, who you are, your core operating system. And I'd say that if you had to choose between this and this and this, or geography or history or whatever it is, and actually knowing yourself, that the greatest return comes from spending 500 to 1,000 hours learning about you. It's the most valuable technology, the most valuable data set that you can possibly have. And we're the only cult in human history that has devalued it to this extent. Meaning, you go back 500 years, and people will be more involved with meditation or prayer or acknowledging something inside or outside, etc., than many of us are today. If you go back 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 3,000 years, at least 50% of most of the cultures on the planet spent a considerable amount of time in self-awareness and self-mastery and initiation. And we are poor, we are impoverished, we are ignorant compared to many of those cults. Now, our cult is the cult of materialism, the cult of capitalism, so things and money, and the cult of science in a reductionist, materialist vein, meaning the science of the psyche is ignored, which is unscientific. Because the reason the human species has had and is having more impact on the planet than any other species in human history is the psyche, is self-awareness, is consciousness. If we had no more consciousness than a chimpanzee, we wouldn't be inventing cars, we wouldn't be traveling, we wouldn't be doing any of the things that are having these big impacts. So to say that 99% of our modern world emerges from consciousness, and we do not, the scientists do not even have an accurate definition for consciousness, let alone know where it comes from. They can't locate it in the body. They're tearing their hair out trying to find which molecule in the brain, and then they come across these weird anomalies. Like one guy had 99% of his brain dead, flooded. And in this little corner of brain left, he had normal consciousness. Well, this just ruins the materialist model of the brain as all this part of, if you kill off this part, you can't have consciousness, that all consciousness are brain cells. Because how can you have a brain that's 98% dead and have the same kind of consciousness of you and I, and then have another person with 100% of their brain? This is called the hard problem in materialistic science. It's hard because the materialistic scientists are trying desperately to prove that consciousness is an illusion, that everything on the inside of the psyche is meaningless, and it's all just neurons firing in this way, and it has no meaning whatsoever. And they have faith that it has no meaning, and they have faith that there is nothing beyond the material world. And so you have the two faiths, the religion of the inner world and the religion of the outer world, both trying to win on faith. It is an incredible act of kindness and intelligence to yourself and everyone else to study the science of the self, the science of the psyche. And if you're willing to spend 40 or 60 hours learning to type at 60 words a minute, too much to ask to spend 500 hours learning who you are as a being? Well, a rationalist, reductionist, somewhat hypocritical scientist, and I say somewhat hypocritical, because if scientists think that science is so important, and the only reason that human beings can be scientific and monkeys can't is consciousness, then it means that consciousness that created science is more important than the science that was born out of consciousness. Now, we have a lot of fratricide, of this impulse to kill off our creator, to kill off the family. And it's rather interesting in the annals of Cartesian logic. René Descartes, where Cartesian materialism and Cartesian logic emerged, René Descartes was a soldier, and he was coming back from war when he was visited, he wrote this in his diary, René Descartes, just a Frenchman, wrote in his diary that an angel visited him. And the angel said to René, he said, René, go forth and map out the world with measurements and numbers. And René, believing in angels, said, okay, I'll do it. And he created Cartesian logic. And Cartesian rationality and Cartesian logic, given to René by an angel, has taken a rather odd course in the last 100 or so years by a fanatical group of people that have been hell-bound, determined to kill off the angel that gave René Descartes his vision. Now, this is poor science. It's poor logic. Because if science was born by the insights provided by an angel, then presumably, without the angel, there is no science. If science is born in the consciousness of the human psyche, then presumably you delete the consciousness and take us back to apes and monkeys, and there is no science. Now, for science to be founded upon, to be resting on the foundation of consciousness and angelic messages, to set about with logic and reason to prove that consciousness doesn't exist, and if it does exist, it's meaningless, so we won't study it in schools, and that angels and deities don't exist, and that that's old-fashioned, we might as well say, well, let's tear up all the science, because if it wasn't for the angel, you wouldn't have got started. So it's shaky logic. It's kind of like saying, we're going to build this house on top of a mountain of bedrock. And this house is going to be strong because the mountain it's built on is stable and strong. Now, having built a great tower on the strong mountain, we're going to set about trying to dynamite the foundation of the tower we built, making the dynamite in the tower that's resting on the mountain. Now, good luck with that effort, because if you do succeed in blowing up the mountain and proving that the mountain doesn't exist, then your tower falls down with the mountain, and you have no more place to manufacture your dynamite. We have a tower of thought that is being founded on consciousness and visions. Francis Crick, the inventor or the discoverer of the double helix pattern of DNA, saw the vision of DNA while taking LSD, a journey in consciousness. But he was too embarrassed to admit having a vision in an age of materialism, so he pretended he came up with it himself. René Descartes had the decency to write that he got his vision from an angel. Well, this is not scientific. You have cause and effect, you have angels, then you have science, you have consciousness, and then you have science, you have LSD, and then you have the discovery of the double helix pattern of DNA. Science is cause and effect. So the cause of René's vision is an angel. The cause of all science and thought is consciousness. And the cause of Francis Crick's breakthrough is a journey in consciousness with LSD. Now, Einstein discovered the theory of relativity while dreaming, while daydreaming and night dreaming. Another adventure in nonlinear consciousness. So if the entire scientific building rests on consciousness that science cannot understand, and rather than bowing to the source that gave rise to it, it seeks to kill the source that reveals its own limitation and inadequacy. Because science cannot explain consciousness currently, no competent scientist will say they've cracked the hard problem. They have set about to diminish it and impale it and ignore it and minimize it to our detriment. They are not behaving scientifically with the scientific method in relationship to consciousness, psychology, or most of the inner world because it is deemed to be feminine. And real scientists are engineers with hard data they wouldn't have gotten without visions of angels, without dreams, without LSD. So you can see the fragility, the juvenile nature, the cowardice of a cult that cannot bear to own its parents. It's ashamed of its parents, basically. It wouldn't exist without them, but it is ashamed of them. This is the arrogance of the Western child. I wouldn't exist without my parents, my grandparents, and my parents before me, but I want nothing to do with them. Well, it's kind of difficult to make that case when I wouldn't exist without them. So how is it that my parents hate themselves so much that they give rise to a child that wants to get away from them? It's an odd mathematical equation. It doesn't hold up. So spend the time, 500, 1,000 hours, 1,500 hours, to studying the rudimentary science of consciousness. The Buddhists have a piece of it. Transcendental meditators have a piece of it. Christian saints have a piece of it. Psychonauts exploring the inner world with psychedelics have a piece of it. Neurologists have a piece of it. Biologists have a piece of it. It's this wonderful synergy. But you have a piece of it too. It's all inside you. And if you will learn who you are and realize more of your potential, you can contribute to the language, to the ecosphere that is the psyche, that is consciousness, that is science, that is the interconnected matrix of energy that we are inextricably linked to scientifically and intuitively and emotionally and financially and culturally on every single level. On every single dimension, we are linked to the larger ecology of energy that we are connected with, that gave rise to us. It's not just our parents that gave rise to us. It's the earth that gave rise to us. It's not just the earth, it's the universe. It's not just light, it's darkness. If it wasn't for gravity, you and I wouldn't exist. Gravity runs as a thread throughout the entire multiverse. We are linked in so many ways that it is mind-boggling how effective the brainwashing of our cult is that convinces us that we are distinct, isolated, lonely, disconnected individuals that have nothing to do with anyone or anything else. That's how many of us feel, having been raised in the doctrine of materialist cult science. It's not science. It's cult science. It's willful ignorance. We're not going to look over here. We're not going to look over here. We're not going to look over here. We're going to focus on this one little thing that proves our narrative. That's not the scientific method. For science to be valid, it needs to explore the inner world and the outer world. It needs to explore all faces of reality and start looking at the relationships between one part of reality and another with the aim of learning the science of synergy, of intelligence, of excellence, of sustainability, of well-being. And that language points to love, which is a distinctly human experience that relates to the science within. Transcendent love is the light side of trauma. In order to understand something fully, in this case transcendence, you need to understand the most horrific, overwhelming, awe-inspiring experiences we're capable of experiencing, and the most beautiful, the most true, the most divine. That music, as we align with the energy patterns that are around us, not through the little narrow moral lens of our cult, but as part of energy relating to other energy in harmony, in the song, that when any chord is hit and it feels right, it feels good. We just feel that's the way, that's the movement. It's the gift of music, moving in that direction towards alignment. And only then can we start to hear the dissonant sounds, the ways that so many parts of our cult are clashing dissonant chords in violation with the host body that we all occupy.